The orc woman appeared at Martin Xavier's farm gate during the worst storm of autumn. Her massive frame hunched against the wind and rain, her tattered cloak doing nothing to shield her from the elements. Martin had been securing the barn door when he saw her standing there, green skin pale from cold, small tusks chattering, pointed ears pressed flat against her skull as water streamed down her face, and something about the absolute defeat in her posture made him pause instead of reaching for the hunting rifle hanging by the door. "What do you want?" he called out, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. She straightened slightly, and even drenched and clearly exhausted, she had an undeniable presence. "Work," she shouted back. "Let me cook and I'll earn my keep. I won't steal, I won't cause trouble. Just need shelter." Martin stood frozen, rain beginning to soak through his own coat. An orc, asking for work, on his property. Every sensible bone in his body screamed at him to send her away, to tell her to keep moving before someone saw her here and made assumptions. Orcs meant trouble. Everyone knew that. They raided human settlements, killed livestock, burned crops. The war had ended only 5 years ago, and the scars it left ran deep through every frontier community. But she was alone, unarmed as far as he could see. And something about the way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained from his gate, the resignation in her dark eyes, told him she expected rejection. Had probably received it a dozen times already tonight. "You can cook?" he asked, surprised by his own question. "Better than you, probably," she said, and there was a spark of something in her voice. Pride, maybe, or defiance. "I can smell your supper from here. You burned it." Martin glanced back at his small farmhouse. He had indeed burned the rabbit stew he'd attempted to make. The acrid smell still hung in the air despite opening every window. His late wife had handled all the cooking, and in the 2 years since her death, he'd survived on increasingly disastrous meals and sheer stubbornness. "I don't even know your name," he said. "Grusha," she replied. "And you're Martin Xavier. I asked about this place in the last town. They said you keep to yourself, that your wife died, that you don't socialize much. You've been asking about me specifically. I've been asking about any property that might need help. Yours came up because you're alone. Figured a lonely human farmer might be desperate enough to overlook what I am." Her voice remained steady, but Martin caught the bitter edge to it. He should send her away. He knew he should. But the wind chose that moment to gust particularly hard, and Grusha swayed slightly, her hand shooting out to grip the wooden gate post for balance. She was exhausted, hypothermic probably. And despite everything he'd been taught about orcs, despite the fear that still lived in his chest from the war, Martin found he couldn't turn away someone in such obvious need. "The barn," he said finally. "You can sleep in the barn tonight. It's warm and dry. Tomorrow morning, if you can actually cook something edible, we'll talk about an arrangement." Grusha's eyes widened, genuine surprise flickering across her strong features. "You mean it? I'm already regretting it, so get in here before I change my mind." She didn't need to be told twice. Grusha pushed through the gate with careful movements, keeping her distance from Martin as she followed him across the muddy yard to the barn. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the way she moved like she expected an attack at any moment. When he pulled open the barn door and gestured inside, she hesitated. "There's clean hay in the back corner," Martin said. "My horse, Copper, is in the first stall. He's gentle, but don't startle him. I'll bring you some blankets." "You don't have to. You'll be worthless if you freeze to death," Martin interrupted. "Stay here." He returned to the farmhouse, his mind racing. What was he doing? Harboring an orc. If anyone found out, the consequences could be severe. The nearest town, Millbrook, barely tolerated orcs passing through on their way to the designated territories further west. actually employing one, giving one shelter. That crossed every unspoken line in the community, but Martin had always been stubborn. His wife Rebecca had loved that about him, even when it drove her to distraction. And something about Grusha's desperation resonated with him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was because he recognized it. After Rebecca's death, he'd felt that same hollowness, that same sense of having nowhere to belong. He gathered several worn but warm blankets, added an old shirt of his that might serve as a nightdress for her, and grabbed the heel of bread he'd been planning to have with his ruined stew. When he returned to the barn, Grusha was sitting on a hay bale, her cloak spread out on a beam to dry. She'd removed her boots and was examining a blister on her heel with professional detachment. "How long have you been walking?" Martin asked, handing her the blankets. 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Lost count. She took the blankets with careful hands as if afraid they might vanish. "Thank you. The bread's stale but edible. There's a water pump right outside the barn door. You remember which way?" She nodded, already wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders. Up close, Martin could see she was younger than he'd initially thought. Mid-20s, perhaps. Her green skin was marked with small scars, the kind that came from hard living, and her dark hair was cropped short in a practical style. But her eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences far beyond her years. "Why are you alone?" The question escaped before Martin could stop it. Grusha's expression shuddered. "That's a long story." "Fair enough. Why are you here? I mean, why not head to the Orc territories? There are established settlements west of here." "Because those settlements don't want me either," she said quietly. "I'm exiled, cast out. This is the only place left to go human lands where nobody knows me, where I might disappear." Martin wanted to ask what she'd done to merit exile, but the exhaustion in her face stopped him. Whatever her story, it could wait until morning. "Get some rest. Dawn comes early on a farm." He left her there and returned to his house, barring the door more out of habit than any real concern. Grusha didn't seem like a threat. If anything, she seemed broken, which was somehow worse. Martin lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the storm gradually diminish and wondering what the morning would bring. True to his word, Martin woke Grusha at dawn. She was already awake, had already tidied the area where she'd slept, and was standing by the barn door watching the sunrise with an expression of quiet wonder. "Come on," Martin said. "Let's see if you can actually cook." His kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled in the wash basin, the stove thick with grease and burnt residue, the pantry a chaotic jumble of supplies. Grusha stood in the doorway and simply stared. "How are you still alive?" she asked finally. "I eat in town sometimes," Martin admitted. "And I've gotten pretty good at hardtack and jerky." "That's not food, that's survival rations." She rolled up her sleeves, revealing muscular forearms marked with more of those small scars. "Do you have eggs, flour, milk?" "Chickens are out back. Flour's in the pantry somewhere." "Milk I get from the neighbor twice a week." "When was the last time?" "Yesterday." Grusha nodded and went to work. Martin watched from the kitchen table, fascinated despite himself. She moved through his kitchen with efficiency, locating supplies with quick assessments, testing the stove temperature with her hand, adjusting the flue with expert precision. Within minutes, she had eggs whisking in a bowl, flour being measured, the stove heating properly for the first time in months. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked. "My mother. She ran the kitchens for our clan's great hall, fed 300 orcs every night." Grusha's voice softened with memory. "She said cooking was the most important job in any community. Anyone could swing a weapon, but it took real skill to nourish people, to make them feel cared for." She sounds wise. She was. The past tense wasn't lost on Martin. 30 minutes later, Grusha placed a plate in front of him that made his mouth water. Fluffy eggs with herbs he didn't know he had, fresh bread somehow coaxed from his temperamental oven, even a small portion of fried potatoes that had been on the verge of spoiling. Martin took a bite and actually groaned. "This is incredible," he said around a mouthful of eggs. "This is basic," Grusha corrected, but he could see pleasure flicker across her face at the compliment. "Give me proper supplies and time, I'll show you incredible." They ate in silence for a while. Martin couldn't remember the last time he'd had a real breakfast, the last time his kitchen had smelled like something other than failure and loneliness. Across from him, Grusha ate with careful manners, her posture perfect despite her obvious hunger. "So," Martin said finally, pushing his clean plate away. "An arrangement." Grusha straightened, her expression going carefully neutral. "I'm listening. You can stay. You'll cook, help with the household chores, tend the garden. In exchange, you get room and board. The barn for now, it's warm and private, 3 meals a day, and—" He hesitated, then continued. "Safety, nobody bothers me here, people leave me alone, that extends to anyone on my property. For how long? We'll start with a trial, 1 month. If it works, we'll extend it. What about payment?" "Actual wages," Martin considered. "Can you do other work, not just cooking?" "I'm strong. I can haul, lift, help with harvest work. I know animals, I grew up around livestock. I can mend fences, repair equipment, whatever you need." She met his eyes directly. "I'll work hard. Harder than any human you could hire. Then wages too. We'll figure out a fair rate." Martin stood, extending his hand. "Deal." Grusha stared at his offered hand like it might be a trap. Then slowly, carefully, she reached out and shook it. Her grip was strong but controlled, her palm rough with calluses. "Deal," she said. "Thank you, Martin Xavier. Just Martin is fine. Then just Grusha is fine too." The first week passed in a cautious dance of mutual adjustment. Grusha proved to be everything she'd promised and more. She woke before dawn, had breakfast ready before Martin finished his morning chores, and approached every task with focused intensity. The house transformed under her care, clean, organized, actually functional for the first time in 2 years. But she maintained careful distance. She never entered a room where Martin was unless necessary. She ate her meals separately, often taking her plate to the barn. When they spoke, she kept her responses brief and professional. It was like living with a particularly efficient ghost. Martin found himself bothered by this arrangement more than he'd expected. On the 3rd day, he deliberately sat at the kitchen table during lunch instead of eating while walking the property line. "You can eat in here, you know," he said when Grusha picked up her plate to leave. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You're not. Sit, eat." She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Martin tried again. "Tell me about your clan. What were they like?" Grusha's jaw tightened. "I'd rather not." "Why were you exiled?" "I'd really rather not." "Fine. What's your favorite thing to cook?" That got a reaction. Her expression softened slightly. "Stew. A proper stew with meat and vegetables and herbs simmered for hours until everything blends together. My mother had this massive pot, big enough that I could have climbed inside as a child. She'd start it at dawn and let it cook all day, and by evening the whole great hall would smell like home." "I have a big pot," Martin offered. "Hasn't been used in years, but it's in the cellar." "You'd let me make stew?" "Grusha, you can cook whatever you want. This is your kitchen now as much as mine." Something shifted in her expression, not quite trust, but a tentative step toward it. "Then I'll make stew tomorrow, if you can get me to town for proper supplies." Martin froze. He hadn't considered that complication. Taking Grusha to Millbrook would expose her presence, would invite questions and speculation he wasn't ready to field. "I'll go alone," he said. Give me a list. The disappointment that flickered across her face was brief but unmistakable. Of course. I'll write it down. That night, Martin lay awake feeling like he'd failed some test he didn't fully understand. Grusha had asked for so little, just a trip to town, probably desperate to see other people, to feel less isolated. And he'd refused her because he was afraid of what his neighbors would think. The realization sat heavy in his chest. He was becoming complicit in the same prejudice that had driven Grusha to his door in the first place. The next morning, Martin found Grusha already at work in the garden, pulling weeds with methodical precision. He watched her for a moment, noting the way the early light caught the green of her skin, the unconscious grace in her movements despite her muscular build. "We'll go to town together," he said abruptly. "This afternoon. You'll need proper clothes, something that doesn't scream refugee. You can wear some of Rebecca's things. You're about the same size." Grusha straightened, dirt on her hands, shock written plainly on her face. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to, but you're part of this farm now. You should be able to come and go freely. And if anyone has a problem with it, they can take it up with me." "Martin, you don't understand. If people see you with an orc, they'll turn on you." "They'll let me worry about that." He met her eyes steadily. "I'm not going to hide you like you're something shameful. You're not." Tears welled in Grusha's eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Martin said simply. "And because I'm tired of being afraid all the time. The war's over. It's time we all started acting like it." They went to town that afternoon, Grusha wearing one of Rebecca's simpler dresses, a blue cotton that somehow made her green skin seem less alien and more striking. Martin hitched up his wagon, and they rode the 2 miles to Millbrook in loaded silence. The reaction, when they arrived, was immediate and hostile. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People crossed to the other side of the street. The shopkeeper at the general store, old Samuel Morris, who'd known Martin since he was a boy, went pale when they entered together. "Martin," Samuel said carefully, "what's this about?" "This is Grusha. She works for me. We need supplies." Martin pulled out the list. "Can you fill this?" "You're employing an orc." The words came out strangled. "I'm employing a cook and farmhand who happens to be an orc, yes. Is that going to be a problem?" Samuel's eyes darted to Grusha, who stood perfectly still, her expression neutral but her hands clenched at her sides. "People aren't going to like this, Martin." "Then people can mind their own business. Can you fill the order, or should I take it to the next town over?" The threat of lost business did what reason couldn't. Samuel nodded stiffly and began gathering items from the shelves. Other customers filtered out of the store, casting dark looks over their shoulders. By the time Samuel had everything packaged, the street outside had filled with a small crowd of onlookers. Martin paid, gathered the supplies, and turned to leave. Grusha moved like she was walking through deep water, every muscle tense, preparing for attack. As they reached the door, a voice called out from the crowd. "Xavier, you gone soft in the head. That's an orc." Martin paused on the threshold. He could feel Grusha trembling slightly beside him, could sense her preparing to bolt. Instead, he set down the supplies and walked to the edge of the store's porch, looking out at the assembled townspeople. "Her name is Grusha," he said clearly. "She's a skilled cook and a hard worker. She's done nothing to any of you, and she's under my protection. If anyone has a problem with that, come see me directly. Don't lurk in crowds making accusations." "Your wife would be ashamed," someone shouted. Martin recognized the voice. Thomas Porter, who'd fought in the war, lost a brother to orc raiders. The words hit like a physical blow. Martin felt his anger rise, hot and immediate. "Don't you dare speak about Rebecca. She was kind to everyone, judged people by their actions, not their race. She would have welcomed Grusha with open arms, and you know it." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca had been beloved in Millbrook, known for her charity and gentle nature. Invoking her memory had been a low blow on Thomas's part, and several people were now looking at him with disapproval. "Come on," Martin said to Grusha, gathering the supplies again. "We're done here." They rode back to the farm in silence. Martin's hands shook on the reins, adrenaline still flooding his system. Beside him, Grusha sat rigid, her breathing too controlled, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "I'm sorry," Martin said finally. "I shouldn't have made you endure that. You defended me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "No one has ever defended me before, not like that. They had no right, they had every right to be suspicious." Grusha turned to look at him, and her eyes were wet. "My people killed humans during the war. A lot of humans. I'm sure some of those people back there lost family members to orc raiders. Their fear is justified. Fear might be justified. Cruelty isn't." Martin guided the wagon onto the path leading to his property. "What happened during the war happened to all of us. Humans did terrible things too. At some point we have to choose to move forward. Is that why you let me stay? To move forward? I let you stay because you needed help and I could provide it. Everything else is just details." They unloaded the supplies in heavy silence. Grusha retreated to the kitchen and began working on the promised stew with almost frantic energy, as if cooking could process the trauma of the afternoon. Martin tried to return to his normal work, but found himself drifting back to the house, drawn by the rich smells emanating from the kitchen. He found Grusha standing over the massive pot he'd retrieved from the cellar, tears streaming silently down her face as she stirred. "Hey," Martin said softly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She wiped at her face with her sleeve, leaving a streak of flour across her cheek. "That man in town, the one who said your wife would be ashamed, he was right. You're destroying your reputation because of me. People will turn on you. They'll refuse to do business with you. Grusha. Stop." Martin moved closer, close enough to smell the herbs she'd been chopping. "I'm a grown man, I make my own choices, and I choose to have you here." "Why?" The word burst out of her like a dam breaking. "Why risk everything for an orc you barely know? What are you getting out of this arrangement that's worth becoming a pariah in your own community?" Martin opened his mouth to give some practical answer about her cooking skills or work ethic. But what came out instead was raw truth. "Because I was drowning before you arrived. Because this house was a tomb and I was a ghost haunting it. Because for the first time in 2 years, I wake up and there's a reason to get out of bed beyond sheer stubbornness." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated at his own inability to articulate the feeling. "You saved me, Grusha. Maybe I'm just returning the favor." She stared at him, wooden spoon dripping into the pot, her dark eyes impossibly wide. "Martin." "The stew's going to burn," he said, breaking the moment before it could become too much. Grusha looked down, realized he was right, and turned back to stirring with renewed focus. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had cracked, letting light through. Dinner that night was the best meal Martin had eaten since Rebecca's death. The stew was rich and complex, full of flavors he didn't have names for, and they ate together at the table, sharing the same space without the careful distance Grusha had been maintaining. "Tell me about your mother," Martin said. "Not the sad parts, the good memories." So Grusha talked. She told him about learning to cook in a kitchen filled with steam and laughter, about her mother's firm but loving teaching style, about the pride on her mother's face, the first time Grusha successfully prepared a feast for the clan. She talked until the sun set, and the kitchen filled with shadows, and Martin lit lamps and listened to every word. In return, he told her about Rebecca, about how they'd met at a harvest festival, about her terrible singing voice and her beautiful laugh, about the way she'd transformed his bachelor farmhouse into a real home. He talked about her death, a sudden illness, gone within a week, and how he'd felt lost ever since. "She would have liked you," Martin said. "Rebecca always said the best way to judge someone's character was to watch them in a kitchen. You can't fake kindness when you're cooking for someone." "That's exactly what my mother used to say." Grusha smiled, and the expression transformed her face. For the first time, Martin saw her as something other than a desperate refugee or a capable employee. He saw her as a woman young, scarred, resilient, and somehow beautiful in her own right. The realization unsettled him enough that he excused himself shortly after, retreating to his bedroom with the excuse of needing to review the next day's work. But he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand the unfamiliar warmth in his chest. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm on the farm. Grusha's month trial period passed without discussion of her leaving. She moved from the barn into the small guest room off the kitchen, though she insisted on paying rent from her wages despite Martin's protests. She expanded the garden, started raising chickens with impressive expertise, and even negotiated a deal with Samuel Morris to provide baked goods for his store, a peace offering that benefited all of them. The townspeople remained wary but gradually adjusted to her presence. Helped along, perhaps, by the quality of her baking. Samuel reported that her bread sold out within hours, and soon other shopkeepers were requesting her goods. Money flowed back to the farm in ways Martin hadn't seen since before Rebecca's death. But more importantly, the house came alive again. Grusha sang while she cooked strange orc melodies in a language Martin didn't understand but found beautiful nonetheless. She laughed at his terrible jokes, challenged him on his occasional laziness, and filled the empty spaces with her presence. Martin found himself taking more care with his appearance, washing up before dinner without being prompted, seeking out her company in ways that had nothing to do with farm business. And Grusha, in turn, seemed to relax into the space, moving through the house like she belonged there, meeting his eyes more often, smiling more freely. It was Grusha who first acknowledged the shift between them, 3 months into her stay. They were working together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm, Martin holding posts while Grusha drove them into the ground with easy swings of the mallet. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said between swings. "Sure. Are you lonely?" Another swing. The post sank deeper. Martin considered lying, then discarded the impulse. "Yes, very. Me too." She set down the mallet, wiping sweat from her brow. "I thought I'd gotten used to it, being alone, being exiled, but living here, being around you, it's made me remember what connection feels like. And that's made the loneliness worse somehow." "I know what you mean." Martin tested the post, found it secure, moved to position the next one. "It's easier to be numb than to feel things again." "Is that what's happening? We're feeling things again?" The question hung in the air between them. Martin looked at Grusha, really looked at her. Her green skin flushed darker with exertion, her muscular arms still holding the mallet, her pointed ears perked forward with attention, her small tusks just visible when she breathed hard. She was so different from Rebecca, from any woman he'd ever known, and yet something about her called to him in ways he couldn't explain or deny. "I think so," he admitted. "At least I am. Feeling things, I mean." "What kind of things?" "Dangerous things. Things I shouldn't feel." He met her eyes. Things that would make people in town even more suspicious than they already are. Grusha set down the mallet entirely, moving closer. "Martin Xavier, are you saying you have feelings for me?" His heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment. He could deflect, make a joke, pretend he'd been talking about something else entirely, or he could be brave. Rebecca had always said bravery wasn't about the absence of fear but about acting despite it. Yes, he said simply. I have feelings for you, strong ones, and I have no idea what to do about it. You want to do something about it, more than anything. But I'm an orc and you're human and the whole world will judge us for it. Grusha's voice remained steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. I know, I've thought about it too. About how impossible this is. About how we're setting ourselves up for pain and rejection and worse. So what do we do? She laughed, the sound bitter and sweet at once. I don't know, I've never felt this way before. My clan had arranged a marriage for me, that's why I was exiled. I refused to marry the warrior they chose, said I wanted to choose my own path. They called me selfish, said I was betraying tradition. My mother supported me, and when the elders exiled me, she got sick. Died of a broken heart, I think, because of me. Grusha, so I've been alone ever since. Wandering. Working wherever I could, never staying long because people always turned on me eventually. And then I found you, and for the first time since my mother died, I felt safe. I felt seen. And now I'm terrified because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to stop it or if I even want to. The confession rushed out of her like water breaching a dam. Martin stood frozen, the fence post forgotten, his entire world narrowing to the woman in front of him. You're falling in love with me, he repeated, needing to hear it again, needing to confirm he hadn't misunderstood. Terrifying, right? She smiled, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. A homeless orc falling for the human farmer who took her in. It's like something from a bad traveling minstrel's song. Then we're both fools, Martin said, because I'm falling in love with you too. The words hung in the autumn air, impossible and true. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Grusha stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and Martin found himself reaching up to cup her face in his hands. Her skin was warm, softer than he'd expected, and when she leaned into his touch, something inside his chest cracked open. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. The worst, he agreed. Everyone will hate us, probably. We could lose everything, I know. So why does it feel so right? Martin had no answer for that except to pull her closer, pressing his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of her earth and herbs, and something uniquely Grusha. They stood like that for a long time, fence forgotten, the rest of the world forgotten, existing only in the small, perfect bubble of their shared feeling. That evening they sat together on the porch as the sun set, Grusha's head resting against Martin's shoulder, his arm around her waist. It felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of allowing themselves this closeness for the first time. What happens now? Grusha asked. I don't know. We figure it out as we go, I suppose. Will you want to hide this, keep it secret? Martin considered the question seriously. His first instinct was self-preservation. Of course they should be careful, discreet. But then he thought about the way he'd defended Grusha in town, about the choice he'd already made to stand by her publicly. No, he said firmly. I'm done hiding. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. I won't make you live in shadows, even if it costs you, especially then. He pressed a kiss to her temple, feeling her shiver against him. You're worth more than their approval, than their acceptance, than any of it. Grusha turned in his arms, her dark eyes searching his face. I never thought anyone would choose me. After everything that happened with my clan, after being cast out, I thought I was unchosen, unwanted. And then you, her voice broke. You just keep choosing me, over and over. That's what love is, Martin said softly. Choice. Not just once, but continuously. Every day choosing to stay, to care, to build something together. Is that what we're doing, building something? I hope so. If you want to, I want to, she breathed. More than I've ever wanted anything. They kissed then, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as years of loneliness found solace in connection. Martin had thought he'd never feel this way again after Rebecca, had assumed his capacity for love had died with her. But this was different, not a replacement or a copy, but something entirely new. Grusha kissed like she did everything else, with full commitment, holding nothing back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Martin found himself laughing. "What?" Grusha asked, smiling despite herself. "I'm just thinking about what Samuel Morris's face would look like if he could see us right now. Probably about the same as mine when you first agreed to let me stay. Complete shock." She traced her fingers along his jaw. "You've surprised me at every turn, Martin Xavier. I never thought a human could be so brave." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid." "That's what brave means." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and discarding them, simply existing in the new reality they'd created. Eventually, the night grew cold enough that they retreated inside, but instead of separating to their respective rooms as they'd done every night before, they hesitated in the hallway. "Stay with me," Martin said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "Just to sleep. I want to wake up and know this wasn't a dream." Grusha nodded, her hand finding his, and they walked to his bedroom together. They lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, Martin pulling a quilt over them both, and simply held each other. It was innocent and profound. Two people choosing comfort over propriety, connection over fear. Martin woke before dawn to find Grusha still in his arms, her breathing deep and even, her face peaceful in a way he'd never seen while she was awake. He watched her for a long time, memorizing the details, the way her tusks were slightly asymmetrical, the small scar through her right eyebrow, the surprising length of her eyelashes. She was beautiful. The thought no longer surprised him. When she finally stirred, opening her eyes to find him watching, she smiled. "Good morning." "Good morning," he replied. "Sleep well, better than I have in years. You, same." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Grusha, I meant everything I said yesterday about choosing you. About doing this honestly. I know. I meant everything too." She sat up, stretching, and Martin mourned the loss of her warmth against him. "But we should probably talk about practicalities, about what this actually looks like." They talked over breakfast, a meal they prepared together, moving around each other in the kitchen with unconscious synchronization. Martin explained his financial situation, the farm's income and expenses, the challenges of the upcoming winter. Grusha shared her plans for preserving food, her ideas for additional income through expanding her baking business, her willingness to contribute equally to household costs. It was decidedly unromantic, this practical discussion of money and work and survival. But it felt important, like they were building a foundation that would support them when the inevitable storms came. "What about marriage?" Grusha asked suddenly, then flushed darker green at her own boldness. "I'm not proposing. I just mean, is that something you'd want? Eventually? Or is this arrangement more about companionship and convenience?" Martin set down his coffee cup carefully. "I loved Rebecca. I'll always love her. She was my first love, my first wife, my first everything. But she's gone. And I've learned that the heart has a greater capacity than we give it credit for. I can honor what I had with her and still build something new with you." "That's not an answer." "Yes," he said clearly. "I would want marriage, eventually, when we're both ready, when it feels right. But there's no rush. Let's just see where this goes." "What if I want there to be a rush?" Grusha's voice was quiet but intense. "What if I'm tired of waiting for life to start? I spent years in exile, years wandering, always temporary, always ready to run. I want permanence. I want commitment. I want to build something that lasts." "Then we'll build it," Martin promised. "Together, as fast or as slow as feels right to both of us." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, unusual enough that both of them froze. Visitors were rare at the farm, and given recent events, an unexpected knock felt ominous. Martin answered to find Thomas Porter standing on his porch, the man who'd shouted about Rebecca in town. Martin's hand instinctively moved toward the knife he kept on his belt. "Easy," Thomas said, raising both hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to start trouble. I came to apologize." "Apologize?" Martin didn't lower his guard. "For what I said about your wife. That was out of line." Thomas's weathered face was tight with discomfort. "Can I speak plainly?" "You're on my property. Say what you came to say." "I lost my brother to orcs during the war. Watched him die, actually. So when I see an orc in town, walking around like nothing happened, like the war didn't matter, it makes me angry. Made me lash out at you when you didn't deserve it." Thomas paused. "But my wife reminded me that you lost Rebecca, and that grief makes people do strange things. So I'm here to say I'm sorry for the cruelty, even if I still don't understand your choices." It was, Martin recognized, as close to acceptance as he was likely to get. Apology accepted. "The orc Grusha, her bread is good. My wife buys it every week now, says it reminds her of her grandmother's baking." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm not saying I'm suddenly fine with everything, but I'm trying. We're all trying. Town's been through enough upheaval, don't need more division." "I appreciate that, Thomas, truly." After Thomas left, Martin returned to the kitchen to find Grusha standing at the window, having obviously heard the entire exchange. "That was unexpected," she said. "People can surprise you, sometimes in good ways." Martin joined her at the window. "He's not wrong, though. We're asking people to make a big adjustment, to reconsider things they've believed their whole lives. Do you think they ever will truly accept us? Some will, some won't, but we don't need everyone's acceptance to build a life together." They spent the rest of the morning working on the farm, but the visit from Thomas had shifted something. Word spread through town that he'd apologized to Martin, and slowly, tentatively, other people followed suit. Not with grand gestures, but small ones, a nod of acknowledgement when Martin and Grusha came to town, a request for one of her pies, a comment about the weather that didn't drip with hostility. It wasn't acceptance, not really, but it was the beginning of tolerance, which was something. Winter arrived with brutal force, snow piling high around the farmhouse and transforming the landscape into white isolation. Martin and Grusha worked together to prepare, cutting extra firewood, stocking the root cellar, weatherproofing the barn and chicken coop. They moved through the tasks with practiced efficiency, their partnership deepening with each shared responsibility. The forced closeness of winter heightened everything between them. They spent long evenings by the fire, Grusha teaching Martin card games from her clan, while he taught her to play the harmonica Rebecca had given him years ago. They cooked elaborate meals together because there was time and no reason not to. They shared the same bed every night now, finding comfort and warmth in each other's presence. On the darkest night of the year, the winter solstice, Grusha taught Martin about orc traditions. She explained how her people honored the longest night with feasting and storytelling, how they believed the darkness was necessary for appreciating light. "We don't fear the dark," she said, her face illuminated by firelight. "We embrace it, acknowledge it. Because without darkness, light has no meaning." "That's beautiful," Martin said, "and wise. My mother used to say that love is like that too. You can't fully appreciate it until you've known its absence." They made love that night for the first time, slow and exploratory, learning each other's bodies with the same care they'd applied to learning each other's minds. It was different from what Martin had known with Rebecca. Grusha was stronger, more assertive, her orcish nature evident in the way she moved and touched. But it was no less tender, no less meaningful. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the warm darkness, Grusha whispered, "I love you, Martin Xavier." "I love you too, Grusha." He hesitated, then continued. "I want you to know there's no going back for me after this. You're it. You're my future if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal?" "Not yet, but it's a promise. When I do propose, it'll be properly, with a ring and everything." She laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I'll hold you to that." Winter deepened, and with it, their relationship solidified into something unshakable. They worked as one entity, Martin anticipating Grusha's needs, Grusha supporting Martin's decisions, both of them building toward a shared future with every choice they made. It was during a particularly brutal snowstorm in late January that everything nearly came apart. Martin had gone to town for supplies, leaving Grusha at home to tend the animals. He'd been gone perhaps 2 hours when he returned to find the front door hanging open, snow blowing into the house, and Grusha nowhere to be seen. "Grusha!" he shouted, panic rising in his throat. "Grusha, where are you?" He searched the house, the barn, the chicken coop, finding nothing. Then he spotted tracks in the snow-heavy boot prints, too large to be Grusha's, leading away from the property. And alongside them, signs of a struggle. Someone had taken her. Martin ran back to the house, grabbed his rifle and his winter gear, and set out following the tracks. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Who would take her? Why? Were they intending to hurt her, to make some kind of statement about human-orc relations? The tracks led into the forest, winding through increasingly difficult terrain. Martin pushed himself hard, fear lending him speed, following the trail even as the falling snow began to obscure it. He'd been tracking for perhaps an hour when he heard voices ahead. "Can't believe you're really doing this, brother. She's a monster. Xavier's lost his mind, shacking up with an orc. Someone needs to remind him what they did to us." Martin recognized the voices. Thomas Porter and his younger brother Daniel, who'd lost an arm in the war. He crept closer, rifle ready, and spotted them in a small clearing. They had Grusha bound to a tree, her face bloodied, her clothes torn. Rage, pure and incandescent, flooded through Martin. He stepped into the clearing, rifle raised and aimed. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Right now." Thomas whirled around, his own rifle coming up. "Stay out of this, Xavier. This doesn't concern you anymore. That's my future wife you have tied to a tree. This absolutely concerns me." Martin didn't waver, didn't lower his weapon. "I said let her go. She's an orc," Daniel spat. "They killed our brother, took my arm, and you want to marry one. It's an insult to every human who died in the war." "The war is over," Martin said. "And holding on to that hatred is only hurting you. Let it go. Let her go. Walk away while you still can. Or what? You'll shoot us." Thomas laughed bitterly. "You don't have it in you, Martin. You're too soft. That's why your wife died. You couldn't even fight hard enough to save her." The words were designed to wound, and they did, but they also clarified everything for Martin. He'd spent 2 years letting guilt control him, letting the past dictate his future. Grusha had taught him that moving forward was possible, that love could exist after loss, that choosing joy wasn't a betrayal. "You're right," Martin said quietly. "I couldn't save Rebecca. Her death broke something in me, but Grusha helped me put it back together. She gave me a reason to keep living, and I will not let you take that from me." He fired a warning shot into the snow at Thomas's feet. The crack of the rifle echoed through the forest. "Next one goes through your leg," Martin said, "and the one after that through something more vital, your choice." For a long moment no one moved, then Thomas slowly lowered his rifle. "You really love her?" he asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "You really want this?" "More than anything." "Then you're a fool." But Thomas moved to cut Grusha's bonds. But you're a fool with a better shot than me, so I'm going to walk away. Come on, Daniel. You can't be serious. I said come on. Thomas grabbed his brother's arm, hauling him back toward the trail. This isn't worth dying over. They disappeared into the woods, leaving Martin and Grusha alone in the clearing. Martin rushed forward, gathering Grusha into his arms as soon as she was free. She collapsed against him, shaking from cold and shock. "I've got you," he murmured, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "You're safe. I've got you." "They said they were going to kill me," Grusha whispered. "Said they were going to leave my body where everyone could see it as a warning to other orcs. I would never have let that happen. Never." Martin pressed his face into her short hair, breathing in the scent of her. "You're everything to me. Everything." They made their way back to the farm slowly, Martin supporting Grusha when her legs threatened to give out. Once home, he tended her wounds superficial, thankfully, mostly bruises and minor cuts while she sat in numb silence. "I'm leaving," she said finally. "Tonight, I'm putting you in danger by staying here." "Like hell you are." Martin set aside the clean cloth he'd been using. "Grusha, look at me." She met his eyes, her own still wide with fear. "You're not leaving," Martin said firmly. "You're not running. We're not letting them win like that. You belong here, with me. And I will protect you from anyone who tries to harm you. You could have died today. If Thomas had shot you, but he didn't. Because when it came down to it, he made the right choice. And yes, there might be others who don't. But I'm not going to live in fear of what might happen. Neither are you. Martin, marry me." The words burst out of him, urgent and undeniable. "I know I said I'd wait, that I'd do it properly, but I can't wait anymore. Marry me, Grusha. Make this official. Show everyone that we're choosing each other permanently." Tears streamed down her face. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one you're getting." Martin smiled, though his own eyes were wet. "So what do you say? Will you marry me?" "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, of course yes, you stubborn, wonderful human. Yes." They held each other in the kitchen, both shaking with relief and fear and overwhelming love. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, they had each other. It would have to be enough. The next morning, Martin rode back to town alone. He went directly to the mayor's office and reported what Thomas and Daniel Porter had done. The mayor, a fair man named Marcus Yates, was shocked and promised to handle it. "You're really going through with this?" Marcus asked. "Marrying her?" "Yes, as soon as possible. It's legal technically, but Martin, you understand what you're setting yourself up for." "Better than you might think." "Can you perform the ceremony?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "If you're certain, I'll need a week to prepare the paperwork." "Make it 3 days. I'm not waiting any longer than that." Word spread quickly. By the time Martin returned home, it seemed half the town knew he was marrying Grusha. The reactions were mixed, some supportive, many critical, a few openly hostile. But Martin was past caring. He'd nearly lost her once. He wouldn't waste any more time worrying about other people's opinions. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Grusha made a simple dress from fabric Martin purchased, cream-colored with blue embroidery around the hem. Martin cleaned his one good suit, the one he'd worn to Rebecca's funeral, and felt at peace with the symbolism. This wasn't replacing his first wife. This was honoring her memory by moving forward, by choosing life and love again. On the 3rd day, they walked to town together. A small crowd had gathered outside the mayor's office, some curious, some disapproving, but present nonetheless. Samuel Morris was there with his wife, both looking uncertain but not unfriendly. Thomas Porter stood at the back, his expression unreadable. Marcus Yates performed the ceremony efficiently. There were no grand declarations, no elaborate rituals, just simple vows spoken clearly and honestly. Do you, Martin Xavier, take Grusha to be your wife to love and honor from this day forward? I do. And do you, Grusha, take Martin Xavier to be your husband, to love and honor from this day forward? I do. Her voice was strong, unwavering. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Martin kissed his new wife in front of everyone and heard a smattering of applause mixed with grumbling. He didn't care. Grusha was his wife. They were married. Everything else was just noise. They walked back to the farm hand in hand, both giddy with the enormity of what they'd done. At the gate, Martin swept Grusha into his arms, carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests about him hurting his back. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said, setting her down in their kitchen. "It was already home," she replied. "But now it's official." They celebrated with an elaborate dinner that Grusha insisted on preparing despite Martin's protests that she should relax on her wedding day. They toasted with wine Martin had been saving for a special occasion, ate until they were stuffed, and then retreated to bed where they celebrated their union more privately. Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Grusha said, "Tell me this is real. That I'm not going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's real," Martin promised. "You're my wife. I'm your husband. We're building a life together and nothing's going to change that." "What about children?" The question was tentative. "Can humans and orcs even have children together?" "I don't know," Martin admitted. "But if we can, I'd like to try if you would." "I would. I'd like that very much." She pressed closer to him. "A family, a real family. I never thought I'd have that again after my exile. You have it now, you have me. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Spring arrived gradually, the snow melting to reveal the farm beneath. Martin and Grusha worked the land together, planting crops and tending the animals with shared purpose. Grusha's baking business continued to grow, and eventually Samuel Morris offered her a permanent arrangement. She'd supply his store with baked goods, and he'd handle the sales. "People are getting used to the idea of you," Samuel admitted. "Some of them even prefer buying from an orc now. Says it proves they're progressive." Grusha laughed. "Whatever their reasoning, I'll take the business." Thomas Porter never apologized for the kidnapping, but he nodded to Grusha when he saw her in town, which was perhaps the closest to acceptance he could manage. Daniel avoided them entirely, which was fine by Martin. Some bridges weren't meant to be repaired. As summer approached, Grusha began feeling ill in the mornings. It took them both a few weeks to consider the possibility, and when they did, Martin immediately rode to the next town over to fetch a doctor who had experience with diverse populations. The doctor confirmed what they'd hoped. Grusha was pregnant. "Is that even possible?" Martin asked, stunned. "Rare, but not unheard of," the doctor explained. "Human-orc children do happen occasionally. They're usually healthy, though they'll have characteristics of both parents. Your child will likely have greenish skin, possibly small tusks, definitely stronger than average, but perfectly viable." After the doctor left, Martin and Grusha sat in their kitchen in shocked silence. "We're having a baby," Grusha said finally. "We're having a baby," Martin repeated, then broke into the widest smile. "We're having a baby." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. A child. Their child. Living proof that love could bridge any divide, that different peoples could come together and create something beautiful. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grusha continued working, though Martin hovered like an overprotective mother hen, constantly worried she was overdoing it. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love rather than any belief she was fragile. Town opinion shifted again when news of the pregnancy spread. Some people were horrified, calling it unnatural. But others, particularly The women rallied around Grusha, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and the kind of support that transcended species boundaries. "A baby's a baby," Samuel's wife declared when someone made a snide comment in her presence. "And that child will be just as much a part of this community as any other. Anyone who says different can answer to me." On a warm autumn day, almost exactly a year after Grusha had first appeared at Martin's gate, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, made more complicated by the baby's mixed heritage, but Grusha was strong and determined. Martin stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, offering water and encouragement, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting outside. When their son finally arrived, crying lustily, Martin felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. The baby had greenish-gold skin, tiny tusks just barely visible in his gums, pointed ears and his father's eyes. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Grusha asked, exhausted but radiant as she held their child. Martin thought for a long moment. "Malcolm," he said finally, "after my father, and Xavier, of course. Malcolm Xavier." "Malcolm Xavier," Grusha repeated, smiling. "Welcome to the world, little one. You have no idea how much you're already loved." They brought Malcolm home 2 days later, and the farm that had been dead with grief when Grusha first arrived now burst with new life. Martin built a cradle that sat in their bedroom, and they took turns walking Malcolm when he cried in the night, both stumbling through first-time parenthood with equal measures of terror and delight. The town threw a surprise celebration when Malcolm was a month old, not a formal christening, since no church would perform one for a half-orc child, but a gathering of well-wishers who wanted to meet the baby and offer their support. Even Thomas Porter attended, holding Malcolm with surprising gentleness. "He's got your stubbornness," Thomas told Martin. "I can see it in his eyes. Poor Grusha's going to have her hands full." "She married me," Martin pointed out. "She knew what she was getting into." As the seasons turned and Malcolm grew, Martin often found himself reflecting on that stormy night when Grusha had appeared at his gate. How close he'd come to sending her away. How different his life would be now if he'd chosen fear instead of compassion. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Malcolm napped inside, Grusha said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About how I told you I'd been exiled, that my clan cast me out for refusing an arranged marriage." She paused. "I never told you the rest of the story." "You don't have to, I want to. You should know." She took a breath. "The warrior they wanted me to marry was cruel. He'd beaten his previous wife to death, claimed it was an accident. Everyone knew the truth, but no one did anything because he was an important fighter, valuable to the clan's defenses. When they told me I had to marry him, I said no. Said I'd rather die. My mother supported me, and when the elders exiled me for defiance, she tried to fight the decision. They exiled her too, stripped her of her position. She died shortly after from pneumonia, but I think it was really from a broken heart. She'd lost everything, her status, her home, her life's work because of me. Grusha, I've spent years carrying guilt for that. Thinking I killed her by being selfish, by refusing to sacrifice my safety for the clan's convenience. But watching you with Malcolm, seeing how you protect us, how you do anything to keep us safe, I finally understand that my mother made the right choice. Love means protecting the people you care about, even when it costs you everything." Martin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Your mother sounds like she was an incredible woman. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you. Would have loved that you chose me, protected me, made me your wife despite everything." Grusha smiled through her tears. "I think she'd be proud of the life we've built. I think she would be too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from gold to purple to star-pricked black. Inside, Malcolm began to fuss, and they both rose to tend him, moving together with the unconscious synchronization of partners who'd learned to work as one. As Martin lifted his son from the cradle, breathing in that uniquely perfect baby scent, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Grusha, who taught him that healing was possible. For Malcolm, who represented hope for a future where differences didn't divide. For the community that had slowly, grudgingly learned to accept their family. And for himself, for having the courage to open his gate that stormy night instead of turning away from possibility. "Let me cook and I'll earn my keep," Grusha had said. She'd kept that promise and given him so much more love, partnership, family, purpose. In return, Martin had given her safety and devotion and a place to call home. It was, he thought, the best deal he'd ever made. Years passed in the pleasant rhythm of family life. Malcolm grew strong and curious, equally comfortable in the kitchen learning his mother's recipes and in the fields learning his father's farming techniques. He attended the local school despite initial resistance and gradually won over his classmates with his gentle nature and infectious laugh. When Malcolm was 5, Grusha gave birth to twin girls Melissa and Miranda, both with green-tinted skin and their mother's pointed ears but their father's nose and smile. The family expanded, the house filled with noise and chaos and boundless love. Martin's hair grayed at the temples. Grusha's face gained laugh lines around her eyes. They worked the farm together, raised their children, and became a fixture in Millbrook's community. Not everyone accepted them, but enough did that they built a satisfying life. Samuel Morris retired and passed his store to his son, who immediately expanded his arrangement with Grusha, making her the primary supplier for all baked goods. She taught other young orcs who came through town, offering them the same chance Martin had given her: work, dignity, acceptance. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Martin took Grusha back to the gate where they'd first met. He'd had a small plaque made, mounted on the gate post, engraved with simple words. "Love begins with an open door." "Do you remember that night?" he asked. "Every detail," Grusha replied. "I was so cold, so tired, so certain you'd turn me away like everyone else had. I almost did, but you didn't, and that choice changed everything." She laced her fingers through his. "Thank you for seeing past what I was to who I could become." "I should be thanking you," Martin said. "You saved my life. You gave me a reason to keep going when I'd forgotten why any of it mattered. Then we saved each other." She kissed him, soft and sweet. "That's what love does. It saves us. From loneliness, from fear, from the parts of ourselves that want to give up." They stood at the gate as the sun set, 10 years older, infinitely richer in every way that mattered. In the distance, they could hear their children playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Martin thought about the man he'd been that stormy night, broken, grieving, isolated. And he thought about who he'd become: a husband, a father, a man who'd learned that the heart could love more than once, that different didn't mean wrong, that courage was just fear that kept moving forward anyway. "Ready to head back?" Grusha asked. "Always," Martin said. "As long as I'm heading back with you." They walked toward the house together, toward the life they'd built from nothing more than desperation and kindness and stubborn hope. Behind them, the gate stood open, a silent invitation to possibility. Ahead, warm light spilled from the windows, guiding them home. And in that moment, Martin Xavier understood with perfect clarity that he'd never let Grusha leave, not because he'd trapped her, but because she'd chosen to stay. They'd chosen each other, again and again, building a love that transcended every boundary society had tried to impose. It was, he thought, the most beautiful story he'd ever been part of. And the best part was that it was only just beginning. Their children would grow, would face their own challenges as half-orcs in a world still learning to accept them. But they'd face those challenges with the foundation. Their parents had built a foundation of love, courage, and unwavering commitment. The farmhouse door opened as they approached, Malcolm silhouetted in the doorway. "Come on, dinner's getting cold," Grusha laughed. "Listen to him giving orders like he runs this place." "He learned from the best," Martin said, squeezing her hand. They went inside together, closing the door on the darkening world, surrounded by their children and the life they'd created. And if sometimes Martin still whispered a quiet thank you to the storm that had brought Grusha to his gate, well, that was between him and the universe that had seen fit to give him a second chance at happiness. In the end, it came down to this. A homeless orc had asked for shelter, and a lonely farmer had said yes. From that single choice, an entire world had bloomed, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Martin Xavier had never let Grusha leave because she'd become his home. And he'd become hers. That was the truest magic of all.